morning, Glacier musicians. Here is our next edition of Music History Coffee Sessions with Ms. K. So today we are going to learn about Johann Sebastian Bach. He was a German Baroque composer. And let's just take a listen really quick while I find my chapter. All right. Perhaps it's not surprising that Johann Sebastian Bach's father was a musician. Sons often took up the professions of their fathers in rural German villages. But it is remarkable that Bach's grandfather, great-grandfather, numerous uncles, cousins, second cousins, and nephews were also musicians. So tight a grip did the family have on the local music trade that when a vacancy occurred in a court orchestra in 1693, an urgent summons went out for not a violinist or organist, but for a Bach. Bach in turn passed on a musical career to 4 sons, 1 son-in-law and 1 grandson. He also passed on to future generations an absolutely astounding volume of music. Bach wrote a new cantata every week for years. That's on top of the concertos, canons, sinfonias, sonatas, preludes, and partitas he cranked out in spare moments. This is the guy who wrote the 16-piece The Art of Fugue for the sheer intellectual exercise. Bach was not a life of drama and excess. He never went on tour, performed before huge crowds, or even left his corner of southern Germany. Admittedly, he found the time to marry 2 women and father 20 children, but on the whole, his days consisted of a steady round of teaching, conducting, and composing. So he had 2 wives and 20 children. Crazy. As inevitable as a musical career with the name Johann for the young Johann Sebastian, born in 1685 in the small German town, his father, great-grandfather, 7 uncles, and 4 of his brothers carried the name along with his sister Joanna and another brother Christian, oddly, Johannes. Bach's peaceful and contented childhood ended in 1694 when his mother, Elizabeth, died unexpectedly. His father followed her to the grave less than a year later. Sebastian was sent to live with his older brother, Johann, in the town of Ohrdruf, and was noted an organist who had studied with Pachelbel, who was famous for the Pachelbel's canon. The brothers' relationship was not without conflict. Johann Sebastian Bach longed to study a collection of music that his brother had been given by Pachelbel, but his brother kept the highly valuable hand-copied score locked in the cabinet. Oh, look at my cat! Oh, man. The brothers' relationship was not without conflict. Johann longed to study... Oh, I'm sorry. I just read that. However, Johann figured out a way to slip his hand through a grill in the cabinet door to sneak out the manuscript. Every night he would lift his brother's music and suspiciously copy the score by moonlight. This went on for 6 months until he realized what was going on and not only locked away the score more securely, but also took away Bach's copy. In 1702, Bach got his first job as an organist for the town of Arnstadt. He was required to direct a choir and orchestra with many members older than he, a sometimes difficult task. One 23-year-old instrumentalist started a scuffle with an 18-year-old Bach in the market square because Bach had called him a Zippelfagotost, a nanny-goat bassoonist. A nanny-goat bassoonist. I'm going to have to remember that one. Bach eventually moved and was working as an organist and conductor still. Along the way, he married Maria Bach, his second cousin, with whom he later had several children with. He also earned a reputation as a temperamental prima donna. He pulled such stunts as asking for weeks' leave and not returning for 4 months. He once threw his wig at an organist and told the man he would be better off as a cobbler. When offered a prestigious job at the court in 1717, he made such a fuss about receiving an early dismissal that offended officials and threw him in jail for nearly 4 weeks. Never one to mope, he used the spare time to compose part of the Well-Tempered Clavier. Bach preferred style with his counterpoint, which is how we write music, a form of music that dominated the Baroque period. In counterpoint, rather than supporting one melody with harmony, 2 or more melodies are played over and against each other. If you've ever seen the musical The Music Man, you've heard counterpoint. Counterpoint evolved a complex set of theories as well as strictly defined compositional forms. Bach mastered it all, combining mathematical rigor with breathtaking inventiveness. Bach's life was dealt a blow when he returned from a short trip and found that in his absence his wife had died suddenly. Again, never the moping type, within a year he had become smitten with a soprano soloist 17 years his junior named Anna. After giving her a prominent position in the court choir, he upped her salary to 3 times that of the instrumentalist and then married her. So they got married. This is his second marriage. They landed in Germany, where Bach took the position of the cantor at St. Thomas's Church. This began the most productive period of his life. He churned out a new cantata once a week, eventually completing 5 full cycles of church music. That is, vocal music for every Sunday of the year. He also composed the St. Matthew's Passion, the St. John's Passion, and the Christmas Oratorio. Another commission supposedly came from Count Hermann, who suffered from chronic insomnia. He wanted his pianist, a former Bach student, to have something specially played to put his boss to sleep. So Bach supplied him with the Goldberg variations. It's a nice story and most likely entirely apocryphal. Don't know what that word is. Goldberg was only 14 years old at the time of anecdote, which would have taken place, and the variations are exactly what you would call relaxing. It's more like that Bach intended the work as an exercise in counterpoint, and that Goldberg was one of the first performers. Bach remained in Germany the rest of his life, although his prodigious output eventually slowed. He couldn't stop himself from quarreling with his bosses. In 1749, in Germany, the city council started auditioning for his successor, even though Bach was still alive and kicking, and rather displeased to have his demise so eagerly anticipated. By then, Bach was an anachronism, and counterpoint's precision and rigor were considered hopelessly passé, but the stubborn composer dug in. In The Art of the Fugue, he explored the possibilities of a single melodic line, even weaving himself into his music by creating a theme based on the notes B, A, C, H. In German musical notation, H is B major and B is B flat. The Bach fugue breaks off abruptly. The story goes that in the middle of writing it, Bach dropped dead. The truth is more complicated. Starting in the late 1740s, the composer's eyesight began to fail. In the spring of 1750, he turned to the famed oculist, Dr. John Taylor, to operate on his eyes. Taylor was no more successful with Bach than he had been with Handel. A brief reprieve of full sight was quickly followed by complete blindness. Seemingly drained of all energy, Bach struggled on for a few weeks and then suffered a stroke. He died on July 28th. Bach's music seemed likely to die along with him. Very little had been printed in his lifetime. The rest was squirreled away in church libraries. What saved him from obscurity was the gift of manuscript copy of the St. Matthew Passion to Felix Mendelssohn, another composer, for his 14th birthday. His grandmother obtained the original from Mendelssohn's piano teacher, who claimed he had found the score some years earlier in the cheese shop, where it was being used to wrap butter. Most music historians think that this was a lie and had inherited the music from a former student of Bach's. Whatever the case, the young Mendelssohn was immediately transfixed, and in 1829, the 19-year-old arranged for its performance in Berlin. He couldn't resist interfering with the music, cutting it from 3 to 2 hours, substituting a piano for the organ, and generally downplaying the baroqueness of the score. Bach would have been appalled by the lush and romantic passion that Mendelssohn performed, but Berlin audiences were wowed. Immediately, the hunt was on for more hidden Bach gems, and ever since, Bach has been a staple of the concert halls worldwide. Not a bad guy who never left his provincial corner of Germany. And here is a picture of Bach, sweating it out, trying to write something. Bach eventually had 20 children by his 2 wives, although only 10 survived adulthood. Of his 6 sons, only 1 didn't become a professional musician. Another son, Gottfried Bernhard, showed great promise. Bach pulled strings to get Gottfried a job as an organist, but within a few months he had returned in embarrassment to pay off Gottfried's debts. A second job ended even more badly when Gottfried vanished, leaving behind still more debt. The family had no word of Gottfried for more than a year, and then news arrived that he had died while enrolling as a law student at the University of Jena. Fortunately, Bach's 4 other sons were made of sturdier stuff. Wilhelm Friedmann, Carl Philipp Emanuel, Johann Christoph Friedrich, and Johann Christian all composed music. Although works by Wilhelm and Johann are rarely played, Carl and Johann were both widely known during their lifetimes and considered more important than their father, a situation that is entirely reversed today. A final reminder to remember is oh my goodness. Sorry, they use like acronyms to say people's names, and so I have to go back and find their name. I apologize. Okay, sorry. One of the most famous 20th century interpreters of Bach was the Canadian pianist Glenn Gould. Born in 1932 in Toronto, Gould showed remarkable early talent and by age 15 was a professional soloist. For the next 20 years, he toured North America and Europe, impressing audiences with his amazing technical ability and eccentricities alike. He habitually shamed on stage dressed in layers to ward off drafts. Avoiding looking at the audience, he swayed and bobbled as he played, invariably accompanying his music with an off-pitched hum. Gould claimed he could never sleep on an unfamiliar mattress and gave up touring in 1964. Many orchestras were relieved. He exhausted conductors with his insistence on unconventional musical interpretation, his rejection of almost any piano provided to him, and his endless adjustments to his specially constructed piano chair. He also canceled appearances at the drop of a hat. Gould devoted himself to steady work and began recording Bach's keyboard compositions, including not 1 but 2 versions of the Goldberg Variations. In most recordings, his hum can be heard over the piano, despite the heroic efforts of recording engineers to remove it. No matter, Gould played Bach like no one else, and fans around the world hailed his recordings as the definitive interpretations of the master's work. Gould was a notorious hypochondriac. He once sued Steinway & Sons when a store manager patted him on the back a little too vigorously. He called it assault and claimed he had suffered permanent damage to his shoulder and spine. However, the pianist celebrated his 50th birthday in surprisingly good health. So everyone was shocked when, a few days later, he suffered a stroke. He lapsed into a coma and died on October 4th, 1982. His recordings, particularly his 2 versions of the Goldberg Variations, remain hugely popular. And that is the story of Johann Sebastian Bach. So we'll just go through the rest of these photos here. So we've got Bach and Handel and a few other composers playing together. It's a very old picture from the 18th century. This is where Bach lived in Germany for most of his life. And this is a monument in Germany to celebrate Johann. And that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this coffee chat on Johann Sebastian Bach. I'll see you guys later.